Hey everybody, this is part 1 of 3 of my Nutrition Basics series. Basically, this video is going to be covering carbohydrates. Part 2, or my next video, is going to be covering protein, and then the last video is going to be covering fat. These are your basic macronutrients, so any food you're consuming is going to be composed of one or all of these 3. So I'm going to go ahead and jump straight in. I'm covering carbs or carbohydrates today. Basically, carbohydrates have about 4 calories per gram. So that'll help you understand your calorie content. Each macronutrient has a different set calorie amount. So carbs are going to have about 4 calories per gram, so that's going to help you kind of understand your calorie intake. And your carbs are typically going to be your glucose, your fructose, sucrose, lactose, fiber, etc. because there are different forms of carbs. Now, fiber I will cover first because it's one that many people have heard of. And there's been a good bit of new recent studies found on this. Now, fiber has 2 different kinds. You have soluble fiber and insoluble fiber. But fiber is kind of like the category, or the blanket term to cover both of those. Now, fiber is non-digestible, so it goes straight through your body. And a lot of people wonder how you can get benefits from that. Well, typically, foods that are high in fiber have a low calorie or a low caloric value. They don't have as many calories in them, but they're also typically higher in nutrients. A lot of vegetables tend to have lower calories, like your broccoli and your carrots and stuff like that, but they're high in nutrients, vitamins and minerals. Some have a lot of electrolytes, stuff like that, but they have very, very low calories because fiber, since it's non-digestible, it's going to help to regulate bowel movements, relieve constipation. Another thing is you have your insoluble fiber, which is going to be like your oatmeal, cherries, fruits, stuff like that, or the vegetables with fiber in it. And what those are going to do is basically help to regulate your blood glucose or blood sugar levels. Notice how the 2 words glucose and sugar are interchangeable. And then it's also going to help to lower your blood cholesterol levels. Then you have your insoluble fiber, which is more for simply keeping you full longer. That's your whole grains, whole wheat bread, stuff like that. And basically that's going to help keep you full longer, and it's also going to help to regulate bowel movements and just go straight through your system. And then a lot of people even use the fiber content and subtract that from their carbs for the day because it's non-digestible, and it does help to lower that blood glucose level. So basically, when you take in carbs, your body's main goal is to convert those carbs into a sugar that it can use for energy, like glucose. It typically tries to convert it into glucose, regardless of what kind of carb you're taking in. So glucose and fructose are much easier because they're naturally occurring in, fruits, vegetables, stuff like that. Your sucrose is an artificial sweetener, like Splenda, so that's a little bit harder, and your body typically doesn't digest that. Lactose is your dairy-based, so that can also be converted over relatively quickly since it's a natural substance. So your carbs are based on how fast your body digests them. Basically, what that means, we have something called the glycemic index. That rates how fast the carbs digest on a 2-hour period, because after 2 hours, your body has typically used the carbs as energy or stored them as fat. So I'll go ahead and try to break down the glycemic index. It's not that difficult to understand. If you look it up online, you'll be able to see where all of your foods rank. I'm just going to give basic examples. The National Academy of Sports Medicine rates a low glycemic index carb as less than 55. It's going to be your peanuts, cherries, your whole wheat pasta, multi-grain bread, stuff like that. Your moderate, which is going to be 56 to 69, is going to be peaches, sweet potato, cantaloupe, the vast majority of your fruit. Then your high GI carbs are going to be white bread, popcorn, baked potatoes, etc. So basically, low digesting carbs, or low glycemic carbs, are going to be slow digesting. So you can just think low is slow and high is fast. If you have a high glycemic carb, like your white bread and your sugary carbs, it's going to raise your glucose level much faster because it's converted over to glucose much quicker. So the way I think of this is, people ask, well, do carbs make me fat? Should I be taking them in? What about low-carb diets, like the Atkins diet and stuff like that? Carbs do not make you fat. Excessive consumption of carbs will make you fat or cause excessive weight gain. So people think, okay, well, I shouldn't be taking in sugar, or I should be only eating low-digesting carbs. It's all about timing it out. Overnight, your body's using up all the carbs for your brain's vital functions, going through REM sleep, muscle repair, stuff like that. So when you wake up, it's good to have a good amount of carbs in your meal to replace that blood sugar, because you always want a certain level of glucose in your blood. So when you take in your slow digesting carbs, it's going to cause that blood sugar level to rise slowly, which means you're going to get your insulin released really slowly as well. Insulin helps to open up your cells so that they can store the glucose and use it. This is why people who are diabetic, they're called insulin resistant. The body can't produce enough insulin to start storing all of that glucose, and it doesn't know what to do with it. So, I recommend the vast majority of the time you're going to be taking in slower digesting carbs before your workout so that you have a good level of blood sugar or blood glucose to fuel the workout. But then taking fast digesting carbs is the best right after your workout. You've used up all the sugar in the blood, and your body even stores some of that glucose in the muscles. Like I said earlier, with the help of insulin, it'll store it as glycogen. It's what your muscles need to contract. It's also what's going to help with your body to absorb protein, other nutrients into the cells, and it stimulates what we call protein synthesis. So essentially, when you first wake up, it's good to take your slow digesting carbs to help replenish that blood sugar level. Like I said, you want to have a moderate blood sugar level at all times. So people ask about the low carb diets and if they work or if they don't. What happens is when you go low carb, or any kind of diet like that, your carbs are strictly based on what you're doing for the next couple of hours, because they digest and are stored after 2 hours. So if you don't plan on doing much physical activity, it's good to take in slow digesting carbs. But it's always good to take in some fast digesting carbs here and there to regulate your insulin and your blood sugar levels. Now, when you're going on a low carb diet, typically what happens is you're losing more water weight than anything. That's why bodybuilders do what they call carb cycling, or they slowly taper off their carb intake as they get ready for a competition. Because as you take in more carbs, your body or your kidneys will actually increase their sodium retention. When you take in more sodium, or you have more sodium in your body, you retain a little bit more water. That doesn't mean you're going to get fat, it just means you're going to retain more water, so you may gain a few pounds, but it's typically not that visible. Bodybuilders try to have this dry look, and they want to have the least amount of water and fat possible, so they do slowly drop their carbs until their competition day. Basically what that's doing is that's just getting every bit of unnecessary weight so that they can show their muscles at the best definition. So your low carb diets, the reason you see rapid weight loss is your body's just dropping off a lot of water, but at some point it will realize what's happening and then try to regulate itself. So I recommend a decent carb intake. The National Academy of Sports Medicine and the International Sports Science Association have their own recommendations, just like every personal trainer does. So what I recommend is you go online and you look up, because based on your body weight, your workout goals, it's going to change from person to person. If you're trying to gain a lot of muscle, typically you're going to have a little bit higher carb intake, because carbs stimulate protein synthesis. When you increase your levels of insulin, your body's able to better use and absorb that protein. That's why they call that bulking. When you start cutting, basically what you're doing is you just need to maintain that muscle. You're not trying to gain any more. So you're going to have a higher protein intake, but you can slowly drop off the carb intake, because you're going to be losing a lot of water, and you're going to appear to be a little bit more cut up than normal, or have greater muscle definition. So that pretty much covers everything on carbs, just kind of summing up everything. You take in carbs, if they digest quickly, like a high GI carb, then it's going to increase your blood sugar levels. And if you don't use that sugar in the blood, or when it's stored in the muscle, if you don't use it, after a certain period of time, typically 2 to 3 hours, it'll be stored as fat, because your body has no other use for it, and it has to be prepared for the next meal. So it's always good to take in a moderate amount of carbs regularly throughout the day. Like I said, you take in more carbs, you will retain a little bit more water, but if you just drop off carbs completely, or go on a low carb diet like a lot of bodybuilders do, your body you can't use that source of energy. So what it'll start to do is it'll actually start to break down pre-existing muscle, or use fat for energy. It would be great if you could only use fat for energy, but since carbs are such an important fuel source, it's going to be typically based on your workout intensity at that point. So I just recommend going online, looking up your weight, your height, or you can send me a message and I can try to help you guys out about your carb intake and what you should be taking in. Because like I said, without carbs, it's a lot more difficult to build muscle, regardless of how much protein you're taking in. But if you guys have any other questions about the glycemic index, carb rating, or basic diet plans or anything, feel free to let me know. Rate, subscribe, and check out my next video. I'm going to be breaking down protein and how your body uses that. Thanks for watching.